Here's a quick look into today's episode.
I mean, there's a lot of guys like me that are out here that put it in and did our time, and we're out here looking back at you, and man, we're rooting for you, all of you. And I still care about all those guys that are out there like lacing their boots up every morning, picking up a gun, and being America's last 100 yards of American foreign policy. If you're gonna go out there and do it, man, just know there's a bunch of dudes like me that are proud of you, and we love you, and we want you to be well. And go out there and be safe, but if you can't be safe, be deadly, right? Like, go do your thing. We love you. We were doing the sustainment rehearsal, and you were having a blast. You were like, here's a vignette, here's a vignette. And you look at me and you said, I don't know why, but I love sustainment rehearsals. This is like my favorite rehearsal. And I looked back at you and said, because this is the only one where all you talk about is how you're going to take care of your people. The most important impact that they have on any organization isn't the training schedule. It's not any of that. It is the culture of that organization. The number one responsibility of any command team is to establish a positive culture.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Today's episode is with Charles Burrow. It was hard to find the words to describe this conversation because it's hard to explain something that's special to you, unique, and memorable. It's hard to define lightning in a bottle. For us, we just called it First Rock. I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Charles Burrow.
Flowers, I looked over and my ex-O was there, like dragging his rifle and all of his shit, trying to link up. He's like, yeah, I was like, that's Matt LeClaire. Like, that's who that was with me that night. And I had told him, I was like, we almost got killed by a helicopter that night when it, you know what I mean? When it almost tipped over. You remember?
Yeah, because it was trying to sling load in a howitzer, I
Hit the
think.
wheel, hit the road. And the road was bermed, remember? And the right back wheel like hit and that pilot saved it. Like, I thought we were going to die that night.
That's how it all comes. We make it through all these deployments, and that's how it comes to an end. Right there.
Right? All this dangerous shit we did, and like some bullshit mount attack in fucking Bulgaria gets us.
I always used to tell the drivers when we were driving from Aviano or driving out to Aviano, they would be driving on the Autobahn like craziness. And I'd say, hey man, slow down. Like, I didn't make it through all these deployments, and this is how I die, is in this like bongo van driving out to friggin', Aviano airfield. No way.
It was always like the on-ramp. Like that very first on-ramp, like had that short run-up. It was fucking sketchy as shit trying to get on the autostrada.
You just had to have guts. Like, you can't go into the traffic circle or onto the autostrada like half-assing it. You need to go on there at 80, or it's like coming out of the pits in the NASCAR, as if I know what the hell that's like.
I used to specifically like just check my email during that like whole time frame. I'm like, fuck it, I just don't want to see it coming.
Yeah, like I just want it to be over. If it ends, if this is how it ends, then I just want it to be over, and I want it to be quick. Yeah.
How you doing out there? You killing it? You look good.
I appreciate it. My health
Good,
is my number one thing, man. I'm trying to be healthy. I'm trying to wake up in the morning and I'm trying to be on fire, feeling good. I woke up at 4:30 a.m. this morning, no alarm clock. I swear to you, because I said, I'm talking to Charles today, and I started writing down notes. I started thinking about the things that we were going to talk about. Which led me to like the next thing, which led me to design thinking about a project that I'm working on right now. And as I'm like looking through this design thinking, all I hear is your voice. Like when you used to talk to me about design, and you'd be like, you need to think like this, like as a field grade. And I'm like, oh my God, like this, it's all started like just coming back to me. And I was like, man, I can't wait to get him on the phone.
Well, it's cool, man. I'm glad you hit me up. It's kind of cool. You got some big names on that podcast, right? And like some players, you know what I mean? And like,
You're a player, man.
Be on the list is kind of cool.
You're a player, and because when I started thinking about it a few years ago, someone said, you should write about all the people that you've worked with and how they kind of shaped your life, and it was like, well, I'm not a good writer, and so, but I wrote these things down in my journal all this time, and it was like,
Yeah.
so when it came apart, and it was like, hey, I'm gonna do this podcast series, and I'm gonna help leaders better understand what's driving people. Who am I gonna start with? Well, I'm gonna start with all the people that shaped my life and all the people that kind of made me the leader that I am. And if I do nothing than share the stories of the people that helped my life, then so be it. If that's not helpful. But when people say, Matt, how did you get to where you're at? How do you go from being a private to a colonel? Well, it's a long road, brother. I'm telling you, like it didn't happen overnight, And let me tell you about Jim Shutt. Let me tell you about Charles Burrow, who I would only know Jim Shutt because of you. Because you sent me to the ROTC and you put me in touch with Jim Shutt, and he changed my life again.
That dude's awesome. That dude's a fucking good dude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I like Mr. Shutt. Like man, that dude saved me, right?
Yeah, you told me about that.
Yeah. So super good dude. Top tier. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. For sure. And
Yeah. And it takes a village, right? Like, everybody talks about luck and timing. Obviously there's skill for sure, right? To be successful in any organization, army, not army, doesn't really matter.
mm-hmm.
Like you have to be adaptable, you have to be like good, and you have to care, and all the right qualities, right? That everybody looks for in people that they want to work with. But like nobody can do any of that. No road that long,
Yeah.
right? Like for me, it was 30 years in the army. For you, you got to be getting there,
Yeah,
right? Like I
31.
don't know.
I'm on my 31st right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah, there you go. Like nobody does 30 years doing anything by themselves. Like
Mm-hmm.
you just can't get it done, right? Like there's too many variables, there's too many things, there's too much stuff. Like you gotta have help from people. And sometimes that comes from some pretty crazy places, right? Like off the wall stuff. You're like look over and somebody says something, there's like magic, right? For a
Yeah.
second. And you're like, let me write that shit down. You know what I mean? And then like 10 years later, you're like, hey, this kid said this shit. He wasn't even talking to me. I just overheard it, the defect or whatever. And like, here I am. And like that fits perfect. And
Yeah.
so, people that don't even know you're helping, they're helping you or helping you. Like you just can't, nobody can do that stuff by themselves.
Yeah. How you doing out there? How's things going out in Germany?
We're good, man. We're good. Kids grown, doing their own thing. It's me and the wife and the two dogs, right? Like just kicking it. Uh, I'm I'm still in the orbit of the army,
There they are.
doing exercise planning stuff. Um, and so we do we do echelon above brigade stuff, like and like warfighters and whatnot, and then we do big NATO stuff. There's like this 7 core exercise I got to do this fall,
Mm-hmm.
and we run through the planning cycles for all that. So I'm still around like the people that speak the same language. I'm still, once I first retired out of the army, I wanted to try something different. I went to Deloitte and I started working as a consultant for Deloitte for a while. Man, I just hated it, right? I just didn't like it. I was too old to change, maybe, right? Or I just didn't, the values and stuff didn't line up right. Like the people didn't line up right. And so an old buddy of mine, John Zimmers from back in Italy, he
Mm-hmm.
was the PSYOP dude that lived across the street from me, great dude, calls me up. He's like, hey, man, you want a job? I was like, yeah, bro, let's go. And so a couple phone interviews, they were like, yeah, you're good, man, get over here. So I flew over here. I've been doing it ever since for like 2.5 years now. Um, and I enjoy it. The what's what's interesting, right, is Deloitte was a disaster. Like
Yeah.
they were paying me great money and all that stuff was good. The benefits are great. Like the company's good for all that. I just didn't dig the people, so that was kind of a disaster. And now over here, I do pretty good. I do all right. You know what I mean? But the in terms of professionally validating, you know, like at post army, you see a lot of stuff on LinkedIn. There's a lot of big voices and influencers out there that are talking about this is what you need to do. This is how you fall in on what you love. Uh, I don't think that I was under any illusion that anything post Army was going to be as professionally validating for me as it was when I was in the Army. Like
Hmm.
that was what I
Hmm.
was meant to do. But like 30 years of it, right? Like you too. You come in as, you're in regiment as PFC, Leclerc doing his thing, right? Like trying not to get scuffed up every day. And now you're leading 5 grand worth of people, or whatever's in the brigade, influencing that many lives. Like, I don't know that there is another thing that I could have been doing post Army that would have felt as validating to me as that experience that we shared in 1503, right?
Yeah.
And some of the other places that I served in the Army too.
Right.
Nothing was going to rise to that level. And so I just wasn't looking for that. I was just looking for a gig,
Yeah.
like something that paid some bills, made some money. I got to hang out with good people that kind of shared the same outlook on things. And like, I've kind of found that in a weird spot. If I'm an infantry guy, right? Airborne infantry dude, like doing my thing. And now I'm doing simulations
Yeah.
exercises. uh, but yeah, the people are good. So, we're all kind of a little family over here doing our thing, and I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. I just watched that video that you made when you were at the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I had seen that before, and I had watched it before, but boy, like I'm not kidding when I said I had chills, when I listened to you, in 2 minutes or less, you explained who you are, why I serve, and I was like, man, this is why, our relationship was special. This is why you had a special place in my heart for, like, as a leader who kind of helped me get from one place in my life and in my career, to the next. We went through some great times. We had some rough times in our organization. And because of that, it was so damn special, just watching that video, man. And yeah, so I'm super thankful that, now I get to so other people get to see what Charles Burrow is all about or hear about what he's about. Because every time I talk to somebody from First Rock, or every time there's a picture or something like that, they say something about you. And I can just see it in their face, and the way they nod, it's the typical, like, he's a good dude. And you don't need to say anything else.
Yeah, man, we had so many, you know what I mean? Like we had so many people. Um, the list goes on of all the quality like people that were part of that organization that were all pulling together, like making it all happen.
Yeah.
And uh, I mean, that's what I'm talking about in terms of professionally validating. Like nothing's going to touch
Yeah.
that, right? Outside of what all the things that we did,
Yeah.
and how much trust we had in people and how much trust they had in us, and trying to steer these 800 dudes across Europe to try to make all these experiences for people. And yeah, like we went through some transitions there that like were difficult, um and they turned out okay. But they
Yeah.
turned out okay because like the people we had in the organization were so good.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
what I want to do, like, right here before we go too far into, skipping forward to like that, is like, I, I would love for you to share a little bit about like why you chose to serve in the first place. Because, like, again, I got goosebumps watching that video, and so like hearing you say that a little bit again. I think people would love to hear it. But for you, like when we met, I showed up brand new. I was Battalion XO. I show up, empty desk, took over for Matt work. The only thing sitting on that desk, it was an empty office, and there was a 3-inch binder from Major Bill Oslin, and he had been the XO, years before that. But that same book was still the only thing that got handed over from First Rock as from one XO to the next, as like call it the continuity book. But I fast forward a couple months later, you became our CSM, and you came down and you were the CSM, and like me and you, I felt like we had this relationship. And you told me, you said like the XO and the CSM have to have this special relationship. I was like, what? Let's just listening. I'm shutting up and listening, right? And you said because everybody's got an NCO, and the XO doesn't. He doesn't have this like NCO counterpart, and like every senior leader, every officer, they need that, and so I'm going to be that for you. And I was so thankful the way you kind of described that. You said I'm going to be there for you, and I'm going to help you. As the XO, as the chief of staff, of this battalion, and I'm going to be that NCO for you. And so, but when we left there together, right about the same time. Like you went to the Sergeant Major's Academy, and I went to ROTC because of you. You said, if you want to be a professor of military science, you need to get a hold of Jim Shutt, and this is the path, and this is the direction to go. But we've stayed in touch ever since. We had a lot of conversations while I was at ROTC and you were doing your master's degree. And so like we have stayed in touch since, every once in a while, like where are you at? What are you doing? But like you have been kind of coaching me, teaching me, you are the proof that like you can have mentors that regardless of rank or where they are in your life, who do you count on? We sometimes call that your board of directors. Like who's on your little board of directors? The people that you go to when you got to make a tough decision, and you've been one of those people for me that a simple text message, and you might not realize it, just me asking you a question about like working with the CSM, like, what do you think? And you like, I think you should do this. Thank you. And because of all of our years together, you were able to do that in 1 minute or less, on that board of directors. So I say all that to say, Charles, like, if you could, what do you want people to think when they hear your name and they're like, this is Charles Burrow?
So where do you want me to start? You want me to start why I joined?
Anywhere you want to start, brother. Anywhere. You don't even have to start. Like, I mean, like, what do you want people? Like, why do you serve? Why did you join in the first place? Yeah.
Yeah. So, right. Dad was in the Army. Grandpa was in the Army. So a little bit of family tradition stuff there. Like I grew up in it. My father did 22 years of service, right? So, the Army's a family business. Like, as you well know, right? That's how it works. So, 17 years old, rambunctious, like, kind of like fighting back under the yoke of the authority of the parents. And like, I obviously knew way better than they did. And I needed to go out there and show them that I could do all these things. And so it was an easy jump, right? I wanted to go to college a little bit. So I did join the National Guard, did the late entry program when I was 17, went basic training when I was 17, and right after I graduated high school, went to IT and all that. And then did some college, and I wasn't like failing or anything, but I was like, you know what, I want to do this Army gig full time. So joined up and went to Korea. And I was out on my own, doing my thing, 19 years old, trying to figure out life, right? And I managed to get by. So, and I think one of the things that I say in the original video when I did the Why I Serve series for the Academy was like, why you join is whatever, right? It's, but the real question is like, why do you stay?
Mm.
Because a lot of people join to get out of a situation or whatever, to get a jump start on something that is their end goal. Whereas, like, I don't know that I had an end goal other than being in the Army. I loved it, right? So, and I think that the motivations for people to remain in the service change over time. And I think that, if you take snapshots of your career or anybody who's been serving for some time, that like those motivations change. And for me, they did, right? Like I was trying to get away from the house. I was trying to strike out on my own. I was trying to get out and do those things early on in my career. And then this guy came along. He was my platoon sergeant. His name was Hubert Hill. And that dude changed my life. And I made E5. He's a retired CSM now, which I had an opportunity to see him again when I was a platoon sergeant when he was a battalion CSM at Fort Lewis, which was really special for me. But that guy changed my life, and I made sergeant, right? And I was a terrible soldier. I'm not gonna lie. I was getting in trouble all the time. I was terrible. But all of a sudden, like, these dudes put stripes on me, And I realized like, hey man, like I got people I got to take care of. Like I got people who are counting on me to like do the right thing. This isn't about me anymore. And so like my whole kind of perspective on the army kind of changes in that flash. And like all of a sudden, like I'm important to these three dudes. And I gotta get it done right. I gotta put in the work. I gotta be deserving of standing out in front of those guys. You know,
Hmm.
I want them to look and say, that's my team leader right there. You know, and I think that that drive, um, carries me through, you know, kind of sergeant, staff sergeant, you know, and then I was out on the trail doing some stuff, doing drill sergeant duty, which I thought was one of the most formative leadership assignments that I had while I was in the Army. It was an incredible experience, being a drill sergeant. And I think, you know, a lot of people have this picture in their head of what that's supposed to be like, and they try to be like what that picture is, like what their image of a drill sergeant is. They try to don this persona that they think is what they need to be. And that's a huge mistake. I don't think you can do that for any job.
Yeah.
And I think people do it for kind of drill sergeant duty, and again they do it when they become a sergeant major. And I used to talk to my students about that. All you can do is just be you, right? All those guys want is just a good dude, a good leader, a person that cares about them and is confident, and you know all that kind of stuff. And so it's the same for basic training privates.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're their guy. If you're their only person. Like you are their conduit into the greater army. You control every aspect of their life, right? And when you have like that kind of authority, uh, if you try to be something that you're not, it always comes off as false, and then they don't believe it,
Right.
right? If you are acting something, that's not going to work. Um, you have to be authentic, and if you can't be authentic, then you shouldn't do that job. Uh,
Yeah.
so that kind of carries me through that, man. And
You
I went on
told
to be a
me,
platoon
you
sergeant.
used to tell me that I want to,
Yeah.
you like the drill sergeant stuff. You used to tell me about that. And again, when I was a major, I used to get goosebumps when you used to tell me that because like I used to tie that to like all the things that I've read. You know, you said one day, you said when I was a drill sergeant, you're just sitting on my couch and you were like, when I was a drill sergeant, you know, one of the first things I would do was we'd sit down all the soldiers and it'd be like, okay, grab your boots. This is how you put your socks on. You pull them up really tight, you know, and then you throw those boots on and then you lace them up like really tight. You don't want any air. And you started talking through in detail how to put on your boots. And I've always used that too when I was growing up, right? When I was a sergeant and it was my job to go down and pick the new Rangers for our platoon. First place I would look is I would look at their boots. I would look at how they're wearing it. Are they laced up tight? Do they have those things cinched up? How is he wearing his boots? Because if they're all loose and they're not broken in, they're going to get blisters. All the things that come with it, right? And you told me about that, and it's the same thing that coach used to say about putting on your shoes, you know, at UCLA. And he'd be like, hey, you know, how you put them on. If you get less blisters, you're going to get more time on the in practice. If you get more time in practice, you're going to get more time on the court. You're going to have less sprained ankles. All those same things. And so Coach Wooden talked about putting on his socks and putting on his shoes, and you talked about putting on your boots. And so like having that, being that drill sergeant to kind of set that foundation. You didn't, that wasn't just the foundation for those privates, but that was probably the foundation for your leadership as you went back out to the force to be a platoon sergeant, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk to people about in terms of that style of leadership is that and this applies generally in any organization. It
Yeah.
applied to the young second lieutenants that were showing up on our doorstep in Italy, right? And it applies to, you know, kind of any, you know, any organization where you're a new guy. Because I don't care if you're going into, you know, Delta Force as a new, you just graduated OTC, right? You show up, you're still the new guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like that basic training private is the new guy, right? And I think that 99% of people, when they show up on our doorstep, they don't come there thinking I'm going to be the worst operator on the team. I'm going to be the worst basic training private ever. I'm going to be the worst infantry rifle platoon leader in 1503. They come with like this hope, right, of doing well and being successful and being a good member of the team. So they come with like the desire that is innate, I think, in people. And so what happens to those people? Because not all of them turn out well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and generally speaking, it's because they either have a really bad experience or they get bad leadership. And
Mm.
nobody just says, "Hey, man, here's how you do it." And the boot analogy is the same thing as teaching a kid how to shoot. Is the same thing as teaching a guy how to pack his rucksack. It's the same thing as teaching a guy how to don a parachute and jump out of a plane or do whatever it is, anything. It's the same thing as you as a brigade commander talking to, a battalion XO who just came in off the street out of ILE and he's trying to, or an S3, and he's trying to figure out how to be a field grade in your organization. You're like, "Hey man, let me talk to you a minute, and here's some things that you should pay attention to, and here's how you get that done," right? Like that's all they're looking for, in my experience. Most people, all they're looking for is a little bit of love in the beginning, right? A little bit of like, "Hey man, welcome to the team. We're here to make you successful. We're all in the same boat. We're all rowing in the same direction, and we're glad you're here." And if you can capture the desire in these people when they show up, uh,
Mm.
there's not a whole lot that can stop you. You know what I mean? There's not a whole lot that can stop those people. That goes to some of the things that I've said about, mission command and esprit de corps and all that, right? Like, how do you go from, employing your unit in accordance with its capabilities to employing your unit to the extent of their capabilities? Like, how do you get everything out of people? And you get that by giving everything that you have. You do that by leading by example, and you do that by taking care of people.
Wow. Like,
Here's
Charles,
one for
you've
you.
always
Here's a
been able to
throwback for
fucking
you.
explain something that's so complicated, so simple. Go.
All right, here's a throwback for you. You and I forget what operation we were going to do, but we were doing we were doing the sustainment rehearsal, right? And you were having a blast. You were like, here's a vignette, like, and you look at me and you said, "I don't know why, but I love sustainment rehearsals." He's like, "This is like my favorite rehearsal." And I looked back at you and said, "Because this is the only one where all you talk about is how you're going to take care of your people."
Yeah.
That's right. So like that's what matters. That's what people care about.
Yeah. How you're going to feed them, how you're going to get them off the battlefield if they get shot in the stomach,
How you gonna
you
how
know,
you gonna take care of them,
how are you going to take care of
right?
them?
Like I care about all of these people. How are we gonna make sure they're good?
Safe,
No,
right? Get them home, right?
that's right.
Take care of them. Bro,
Get our
nothing.
shit done.
The things haven't changed. As you scale up in the Army. I just came from Alaska and we did the sustainment rehearsal and we did the multiple rehearsals out there in Alaska with Jimmy Howell and Chris Brawley in the 11th Airborne Division. But as we were going through those rehearsals, like it was the same thing. How are we going to take care of somebody if the temperature drops down to minus 40? Where are they going to move to? How are they going to be warm? How are they going to get some food? And we said, I must have said this 50 times in 50 different ways, but I said, soldiers will do just about anything for you and for the organization if they know that there's a promise in the near future of some dry feet, a little bit of chow, and maybe a little bit of warm, right? Especially up there in the minus
Mhm.
20. Those soldiers would do anything. They had their eyelashes were frozen. They had ice coming down. But if they knew that in about 6 or 8 hours, they're going to be back in an Akio tent, they're going to get warm, there's going to be a hot meal because they're going to boil some water and they're going to get it. And maybe I can take my boots off, put some dry socks on. Boy, I'll do anything for the next 6 hours. I could stand on my head out here if that promise. But as soon as you take away those promises of taking care of them and there's no end in sight, it's like every step I'm taking now, I'm getting further away from the chow. I'm getting further away from that tent. And in the Arctic, that shit'll kill you. You make that mistake one time, you make it once, it's over. Those you will die. They'll die out there. And the same thing would happen in the jungle, and the same thing happened in combat, right? If they don't know you're going to take care of them, here pretty soon, and you're going to get them off the battlefield if they get shot in the stomach. Their steps are tentative moving forward, right?
Well, you remember the canceled jump in Spain?
With the winds that were like 50 miles an hour.
That's right. And the boys got out there, and Matthias was out there in the snow, and I came back and I was like, hey man, we got to get these dudes out of here.
We were
And
not
like it
prepared
was
for
an
how
all
cold it got.
yeah, I mean it was snowing sideways, right? Like the boys like and they were just out there. And that's it, man. Like how do you or the time when our boys marched across JMRC in the fucking rain, you know what I mean? And like they walked the entire length of the box and back. Like they'll do anything. They just have to trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And you establish trust by they have to believe that you're going to take care of them. They don't even have to know that the details. They just have to know that their leaders care enough about them that they're not going to sell them short and they're going to take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. If they believe that, they'll do anything.
Yeah. So we're skipping a little bit when we keep talking about our time together in First Rock. And, there's a lot of people that have served in the Army. There's a lot of people that have been a part of organizations, whether it's a sports team or something like that. And they're like, those times were special. What was it about those times, and what is it about those kind of teams that makes them special, that people can come together and like, as soon as you see them, you see James Bradshaw, who's at the G3, up at the G3 right now with me here at USERPAC. And every time I see him, like there's this instant, what do you need? How can I help you? Credit because we were on that team, together. What is it about those teams that makes them so special?
I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. So there's a couple of times in my 30-year career where I would point at and say like, that was magic. Right. And I think that to steal from doctrine and say, the principles of mission command, when you start talking about things like trust and demonstrated competence and, that kind of stuff, shared understanding, you start talking about those things, right? Like, and the buy-in that people have in the organization and the things that we just covered about people believing that you're going to take care of them and you're giving them these opportunities to do the job that they love and you're out there killing it. It always comes back to the people, right? It always comes back to the culture of an organization. And I stand by what I've said before, that if the top two people in the organization, the commander and the CSM, like the most important impact that they have on any organization isn't the training schedule, it's not any of that, it is the culture of that organization. The number one responsibility of any command team is to establish a positive culture. And you gotta remove obstacles to that. There's models for organizational change out there. Cotter's model for organizational change is a good one. And you got to say, hey, these are the things I care about. These things are in line with our values as a profession. And you can count on me to row as hard as everybody else is rowing. And excellence is the expectation, right? And if you can get people to buy into that, like again, there's just like no stopping it. Like it just snowballs, and everybody's doing it, and everybody's on board, and you'll see it on all the small details.
Yeah.
You'll see it in the participation of your hails and farewells. You'll see it in the pride that people have when they stand up in front of their formation and somebody pins senior parachutist wings on them, right? Like. You'll see it in everyday activities. You'll see it in your dining facility with the cooks back there. Going the extra mile and like going out and buying spices that the Army didn't provide them, just because they know that everybody that's coming through and is counting on them to provide them, a quality meal or whatever. Like everybody's handling their portion and doing it the absolute best that they can. And that starts with the commander and the CSM.
Wow.
Or the first sergeant, or whoever, or the PL and the platoon sergeant, whatever the two leaders are.
Yeah, I like how you just ended that with the people, whoever it might be, is you create the culture, but things you just kind of nonchalantly put those out there because those of us that were in First Rock and those of it ever served in the 173rd know what you're talking about. But like you're off literally in this country all by yourself, right? And that first battalion is on a totally different base, even than the brigade
Mhm.
headquarters. And we have our own chow hall. And we were gonna shut that thing down because it wasn't getting the head count. And so then how do
That's
you
right.
get the head count? And then how do you take pride? And then those cooks, they bought their own, dress gear, put their own patch on it that says we are First Rock, and this is how we're going to get our head count up, and we're going to feed. Remember, every day when we did manifest call, out there is 600 to 700. There's a 700 head count, right? If you
Yeah,
bring
that's
chow
right.
out to the PT field instead of missing chow, you increase head count three times, and now that money can start being reinvested into the food that they're getting fed, and that chow hall became the place that everybody there at CTAF and everybody wanted to be a part of, to come over there and get that chow, because those cooks took pride, and First Sergeant Reed and all the folks in our support company, they took pride in like what it is that they did. And then they were just doing things. You come around a corner and you'd be like, "What are they doing?" They're innovating. They're motivated. They're inspired. The word I've been using lately is they're just inspired. You're not giving everybody all the answers. You're just putting enough out there, thought, inspiration, to make them want to go and find things out for themselves, to want to solve problems for themselves. And then them at their level become the ones that are inspiring the people below them. But it was created because of the commander in the command team.
Yeah. One of the things you used to say all the time is you never tell your best people no, right? They're your best people for a reason, right? Like you got to let them go out there and do it and innovate and think through problem sets and come back with answers and like you figuring out the defect stuff, right? Like as the executive officer for the battalion, like that was thinking outside the box. That was a young major, like using the tools at his disposal and seeking some advice and figuring out how to solve a problem. And but what's important about that experience is the reason to do that was because we wanted to take care of our people.
Mm,
That's the reason we did it. And they all knew that. And they believed that all of us were invested in their well-being. And their well-being is also good training and all that other stuff that's important for every unit. And that's because how the battalion leadership led the battalion, and those company commanders were amazing. The first sergeants, the Lions of 1503 were incredible. Like everybody was thinking the same way, and that reflected in the actions of every single soldier in the battalion.
for sure. Hey, this next bucket that I want to kind of go in with you is NCOs, the backbone of the Army, right? And when you
Yeah.
came in, the way that you put your arms around those sergeant first classes and the first sergeants, the Lions, as you said, those are the first sergeants, right, of 1503. That was all of them, right? And you put your arms around them, and in a way that I've never seen anybody do before, and I've never seen it replicated since, right? With the way you put your arms around them. But you didn't separate them, the NCOs, from the officers. You brought us together in a way that, again, I've never seen, before. Before we talk about how you helped me and how you helped us with the staff and how the NCOs got involved in the 3 shop and became truly, when people say we need to get the NCOs empowered and get them more involved. Everybody says that, but very few people know how to do that or what that really turns into, right? But before we go that bucket, that'll be the second part, right? The first part is,
Yeah.
what are the things that you made those NCOs in order to be the backbone of our battalion and the brigade? The jump masters, going to the schools, doing the jump master OMLs, like being the ones out there running the ranges, doing the MOIs, not the second lieutenant, right? Like led by their platoon sergeant, led by the first sergeant. And what were those things that you kind of came in and said, this is what the backbone of the Army must be able to do?
So we have to, number one, we have to be accountable, right? Um, Anything that happens in an organization is probably touched by an NCO at some level. And so non-commissioned officers in your organization have to be accountable for the good and the bad, right? That happens in that organization. And you got to give them credit for the good stuff, and you got to help them shore up the bad stuff. And then character, The character of your non-commissioned officers is incredibly important. It goes back to some of the things that we just discussed about caring for your people and caring about their training and taking care of the soldiers that you're charged with, and all of that's in the creed of the non-commissioned officer. All that's like part of the storied history of the Army already. Like that stuff is out there. You just have to live it. You know, I feel like all the NCOs in our organization would get up every morning, and while they were shaving in the mirror, they were trying to figure out like how they were going to be better that day, right? Like their mind was always on like, here are the things that we need to get done, and here's the things that I want to do. Because I don't want to fail my teammates to my left and right. Like I don't want to be the weakest link in the chain. Like I want to
Mhm.
be good because all these people are counting on me. It's the same thing as when they finally when they put those 3 stripes on my collar back in the day, and I was like, holy crap! Like these guys are counting on me. Like that matters. And like I got
Mhm.
to be good. I got to deserve that. And so, kind of living up to the deserving of the charge that's been given you is important, right? When we used to have those guys sign the when they would get promoted to sergeant in our formations every month, like that stuff's, and then we would have the guys that got promoted last month, like read it off or whatever. Like that stuff's incredibly important. So
Mm. Yeah, they
they have to
signed
believe.
the charter, right? They had to
Yeah.
sign it in
Hmm.
front of everybody, and then
Yeah.
the other
Hey,
folks
I'm a
had to read
non-commissioned
it.
officer now, and you can count on me,
Yeah.
right? And like super visible. I think for the greater organization writ large, right? Not just a battalion or not just our battalion, right? I think we have to remember that there is a difference between the chain of command and the non-commissioned officer support channel. And like everybody knows that they're different. But the fundamental difference is the only person that's in both is the squad leader, right? After that, so when you start going platoon sergeant and up, it's just NCO support channel. So what does that mean? So when my first week, when everybody's got their eyes on you and you got to make sure that you do the things that are important to you because everybody's watching.
Hmm.
I pulled him in and I was like, listen, man, I'm not your boss. Like you have a boss. Like you have a commander. I'm not your commander. In the NCO support channel, my job is to support you, not the other way around. Like it isn't the first sergeant's job to support me in my endeavors as the command sergeant major. It's the command sergeant major's job to support first sergeants. And it is the first sergeant's job to support platoon sergeants. And it is the platoon sergeant's job to support squad leaders, right? Like that's the fundamental difference. And I think that if you look at it through that lens and you realize that that's your responsibility and you recognize how grave that responsibility is and you keep that in mind, like you can get a good team. Like they'll come to you when they need things because you're there to support them, you know? And you're not trying to circumvent a chain of command. You're not trying to, give them a bunch of stuff to do so that you look good. You're just trying to help them accomplish their missions. And everybody needs a little bit of help every once in a while.
Yeah. You're there to help them accomplish the mission that their commanders told them that they had to do. That was in the mission statement. That was
Yeah.
a part of the orders that they were given to accomplish these tasks. And then you support those leaders in order to do it.
Yeah. How can I help you, man? Like, what do you need? Like, I can figure that out for you. Like, those are important things, right? And that
Mm.
establishes trust. It's all based on trust, right? But that lets them know where you're coming from, and they're not trying to shy away from you because every time they walk in your office, you give them something to do. They already got enough on their plate. Like you just need to help them out.
Yeah. Yeah. You, you,
Yeah.
you say that as if, again, you say that as if it's just simple and that it's easy. And if it was easy and if it was that simple, we would see that a lot more often. But how often do we see people sitting around a table and one person putting them to task and just saying, emptying their green book on them and saying, hey, here's all the things I need from you, versus I've got my book open. How can I help you? How can I reduce the obstacles? How can I support the commanders to accomplish what they need to be done and advise them? So now you came in and you did that with the NCOs, but then you started to look at me, and like one of the first things you looked at me was you said, hey, the way we run these meetings has got to get better. Like we've got to run, like there's got to be a purpose, and I looked at you and I was like, you're so right, but how? Right? Like we got to make them go from an hour and a half to less than an hour. What are the inputs? What are the outputs? And you started reminding me, hey, what did you learn at CGSC? Like remind yourself what you learned. What were those things? Because as an officer, you're going through Command and General Staff College. Like you have no context whatsoever. Like they're just teaching you all this stuff, but you've never like run a battalion, so you don't know how to do it. But like then you have to remind yourself, what was I taught at these schools? So now I can kind of implement that at the battalion level. So that was where you started. You started with meetings, but like what was going through your mind when you started saying, I'm going to help the leaders. I'm going to help the officers. I'm going to help support the staff officers that we had in our organization.
So, I mean, at with the transition from direct to from direct organizational leadership is comes kind of later in an NCO's career. Maybe a little bit at the sergeant first class level if they find themselves in a staff section, right? Like they're doing a little bit of organizational leadership because they're trying to think about things that are just not standing in front of them. But generally speaking, the first sergeant is the first person because there's only three of you. It's you, the commander, and the XO, and you got to figure everything out for this company, right? And you can't have a meeting with every single person in your formation every single day and like tell them all the things that they need to do. So you have to figure out how to go from direct to organizational level leadership. Yeah, you can have a meeting with your platoon sergeants typically, and then once you go from first sergeant to sergeant major, it's all organizational leadership. And so you have to steer your formation through those types of things. Like you have to steer your formation through the staff. You have to steer it through like the touch points that you have, and you have to hope that people understand the intent and can move out and execute based off of, policies and things like that. And so in order to do that, there were a couple of lines of effort that I had for myself personally that I felt were important. And number one was go talk to company commanders. Right. I knew that I was going to interact with first sergeants on a regular basis anyway, because I was a CSM. It's just how it works, right? Natural order of things. But I used to seek out company commanders, and I would start with the guys up in the brigade S3 shop, the guys that are on the pre-command list or, the command queue that are sitting on the bench up there, like rowing away, trying to get it done so that they get to command in 1503 because it's the best airborne infantry battalion on the planet, right? And so I would go up there and meet them. And there's two types of captains up there, generally speaking. There's the ones that realize that they're talking to the battalion CSM of one of two infantry battalions in the brigade, and then this is an interview. And then there's the guys that don't recognize that and don't have time for you. And so, I go back and tell Wilkins about it, right? But I would go up there and talk to those guys and say, "Hey, man, like, how's it going? Like, how you doing? Are you excited? Like, are you fired up? Are you ready to come do this stuff? Like, what do you think?" And just kind of get to know them and let them know that I was I was a safe guy to talk to. And then when they would come up on the queue and they would, come on the list that they were coming to our battalion, I would go back and talk to them again. And now it's a different conversation. Like, "Hey, man, welcome to the team. Like, we're excited to have you. Like, is there anything you need?" Like that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, they always have the same kinds of questions, like, how do I counsel my first sergeant? Like, what do I do? That kind of stuff that they're nervous about. And like, those are easy answers, right? You just have a conversation with them and you tell them what you think and then they come down, and the change of command happens. And then they're in the seat and they're like, head is spinning. They don't know, you know what I mean? How it's going to go. So that first week or so, I'd give them a few, maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks in the seat. And I'd go back and I'd walk into his office and close the door and be like, "Hey, man, how's it going? Like, are we helping you out? Do you have everything you need?" And it was really just kind of establishing a relationship with each one of the individual commanders to know so that they could trust me. Right. And then that just grew. And then you would get questions, like, "Hey, what does the boss think about this? Like, I think I'm going to go in here and I want to talk about these things. Like, what do you think his take on this is?" And then you got to be right. You got to tell them, and you have to know. So you have to have a good relationship with your guys so that you're not giving them bad information. And then they realize that you're a person they can trust. And so, hey, it's a little bit like the mafia, right? Occasionally I go in there and be like, "Hey, man, I need a favor. Can you get this done for me?" And they're like, "Absolutely, Sergeant Major, anything for you." And like, that's kind of how you keep it going. For the meetings, right? I think from what I have seen over 30 years, right? Um, I think most units forget to do it the Army way, right? They think that their unit is somehow special and that the Army model for running a training meeting or running a command and staff doesn't fit for them. That's bullshit, right? Like, that's bullshit. Like the Army has figured that stuff out with lots and lots of great leaders, with lots and lots of great experience, and they put it in a book for you. Like, just do it that way because that way works. You know what I
Yes.
mean? You know, we don't need to deviate from that. And the last thing I'll say, or what, kind of the last thing I'll say about training meetings and command and staff is command and staff's not a meeting. That's an inspection, right? Like everybody knows what the rules are. Everybody knows you got to have your award in on this time. Everybody knows you got to do this guy's eval. Everybody knows you got to have security clearance. Everybody knows blah, 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 blah. Everybody knows what the standard is. So you don't even have to talk at a command and staff. You put the slide up, it's all green. Next slide. You put the slide up, there's a red on there. Hey, what's going on with that? All right, I can help you fix that. You can get through that in like 30 minutes. There shouldn't be a discussion. Everybody knows what the rules are. You know what I mean? Take all that extra time that you save on command and staffs and talk about training. Figure out how you're going to do the craziest live fire ever in Bulgaria, right?
Yeah. Once again, here you are. You make it sound like it's so simple. I feel like so many times I've gone when I went to ROTC with Jim Shutt, right? One of the first things
Yeah,
he said is like, we are in the Army. Like, we need some systems. Like, we need training calendar. We need fragos.
yeah,
We need orders. The Army already told us how to do this. And everybody wearing a uniform is familiar with those systems. It doesn't need to be done some special way.
that's right.
And
But we
we're,
remember we were talking about our Frago. We were wrestling with that, like what goes in it, what doesn't go in it, right?
yeah,
And you were like, man, like, do we put all these staff tasks in the Frago? Because I feel like we're just telling ourselves what to do. And I said, no, man, the difference is at the bottom of that order is the commander's signature. That's him telling you to do it. So when you put that stuff in a Frago, you're essentially showing it to the commander and saying, is this what you want me to do? And he says, yes. Like, the Army's got a system. It's all there. You know what I mean? All you got to do is follow it, generally speaking. You'd be all right. At least use that. At least start there if you're going to use that as a point of departure, but at least start with what the Army, way smarter people than me, put that together. You know what I mean?
for sure. I think one of the things I'm learning as I've continued on is every time you move from one level to the next, you go from being a company commander to being a field grade officer, right? You got to
Yeah.
reread those things. You got to learn them again because you're seeing them from a different level, from a different lens now. And then you go to be a battalion commander and you got to remind yourself what it was like to be a company commander, what it was like to be a field grade. Now read it from your lens, from the lens of a commander, for the lens as a sergeant major. And each time you got to kind of remind yourself, review it. Now, what's changed at my level? How do I coach the people that are going through those phases? But how does that apply to me and to the position that I'm in now?
I think that your experiences, right? Um, Change, like the experiential, like learning that has happened to a soldier over the course of his career. Because I will tell you that, young Sergeant E5 Burrow read the leadership manual, right? For sure. Like cover to cover, right? I read all that stuff when I was that young. The lessons I took out of that weren't the same lessons that I took when I reread it again as a sergeant major. Like those are completely different. Just my experiences, because then I can look at some of that stuff and say, "Oh, I remember when this happened, and this like explains to me why we had this outcome." And like now I understand that better, and I know how I can either avoid or replicate that same outcome. And then just the level of understanding, the depth of the understanding is important because you know Colonel Leclerc talking to Lieutenant Leclerc. How many things could you have taught young Lieutenant Leclerc, right? A million things. Like Sergeant Major Burrow could have taught young Sergeant Burrow a million things. And so, but we read the same book.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So, hugely important to kind of read blue and to just think about the stuff, right? Even if you just come to the same conclusion, at least that conclusion's been reinforced and you know it's right.
Yeah. You talked about this a little bit earlier, where you said some of the things that you're doing right now and how you kind of got to those things, right? But how did you know, like, when it was time to kind of to take a slightly different direction? Like, you're wearing that uniform, and I need to go. I want to go try something different, but it'll never be the same. How did you know
Yeah.
when it was kind of that you were at that moment? I'm sure it was a slow process, but like, how did you know when you were at that moment?
You talking about retirement?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Knowing when to off ramp is tough, right? And I went from Italy and I went over and I was the Mustang team CSM at JMRC, before I went to the academy. And so I was doing that gig and I was enjoying it. I was having a great time. Curtis Buzzard was the ops group commander, right? Now General Buzzard, that guy's amazing. You know him, right? Like one of my favorite people. So I was having a blast working there. And but the army ends for everybody someday. Like nobody gets to stay in the army forever, right? And so uh, I knew that I had had a couple like really magical times in my career, and I was, very thankful for those. And I was thinking about like how do I set the conditions for me to be able to do the things that I want to post this amazing experience. And I was getting pretty long in the tooth. I'd been in the army for a while. And there were some other things that I wanted to do. I wanted to go get a master's degree, right? To say that I had done that. I wanted to, figure out if I could be successful in another way, post military, if I had what it took to do the things that everyday people have to do, right? In the army, there's a lot of things that are kind of taken care of for you, right? Like somewhere there's an XO making sure the DFAC is good, so you always got chow. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you don't have that outside the army. So I wanted to see if that I could be successful outside of the army. So I looked at the fellowship opportunity, which is an incredibly good opportunity for senior non-commissioned officers for E9. So like the Army's really taking care of us with that. And so I submitted that packet, and my branch called me. It was the only time in my entire career where my branch called me. They were like, "Hey man, what are you doing?" I was like, "What do you mean?" I was like, "I submitted the fellowship packet. You got it on your desk?" He's like, "Yeah, it's sitting in front of me. That's why I'm calling you." I was like, "Well, are you gonna sign it? Because they got to approve the release from your branch, right?" I'm like, "You gonna sign it?" He's like, "Well, are you sure this is what you want to do?" I said, "Yeah, I think so." He's like, "Well, maybe you should wait for after the brigade board." And I was like, "Okay, man, like, tell me right now, am I competitive for a brigade combat team? Right?" And he's like, "Well, I can't tell you that. Like, I mean, blah, 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 blah." I was like, "Okay, sign the paper, Brooks. Sign the
Sign it
paper.
then.
Like, I'm going to go do this fellowship." And I think the reason, and this is another thing that I used to tell my students, is I told them when you get to this level, right, and the level where you're at too, at this stage, you're a franchise player, right? You're vested, right? And franchise players are expected to sacrifice for the benefit of the team, right? And you're expected to do whatever the team needs you to do. And so as soon as you have it in your head that if the Army asks me to do this, I'm going to say no, it's time for you to retire.
Mm.
If you are willing to tell the Army no when they ask you to do whatever it's going to be, then it's time for you to get out of the Army. And I think at that point in my career, if they had told me you got to go do this Wazoo job at this Wazoo place, I was going to tell them no. And that's when I decided, all right, it's time for me to start looking at a way to retire. And what is the best way for me to contribute until I get out? And I felt like the opportunity to teach, brand new sergeant majors, some doctrine and give them the benefit of my experiences was going to be valuable to me. And that's the path I took.
Yeah. That reminds me of when I can remember it like it was yesterday. I had banged up my knee, right? I tore my ACL so I had a left ACL ruptured. Yet here I am, Battalion XO, still doing it. So I was on the elliptical, like I always was, because it was hard to run at that moment. And I asked you, like, what should I do? Like, should I go to ROTC and be a professor of military science, or should I be a battalion commander? And we had this like 30-minute conversation about how to lead and what's the difference and do what you want to do. And I'm pretty sure you used that franchise player. You said the minute that you
Hmm.
start asking the army or thinking that you're going to go one way or the other, think about that. Like, why are you doing it? And I said, I want to have an impact on people like soldiers, future officers, and I want to help them be prepared to be good lieutenants. And you're like, you can do that at ROTC, and you can do that as a battalion commander. You can do both.
That's
Like
right.
you can do both, and you will do both. It's not one or the other. And I started thinking, well, why can't I do both? I absolutely. And the reason it was in my head is because my branch manager told me, if you go to ROTC, you will not be a battalion commander. Like it's not, you can't do both. You need to go and do this and you need to do that if you're going to be a battalion commander. I said, well, I don't want to go do those things. I've always wanted to be a professor of military science and that's what I want to go do. He said, okay, well, you can go do that. You just won't be an infantry battalion commander.
Looks like he was mistaken.
He's probably not in the Army anymore. I don't think he's in the Army anymore because that was the advice that they were giving people. He also told Jimmy Howell he would never be a battalion commander, and they also told Don Neal he would never be a battalion commander
Yeah, I went to Don Neal's change of command.
because we spent too much time in the Rangers, is what they said. That we would not be able to be battalion commanders. Mathematically, it wouldn't work out for us. You had too many HQs, and you cannot be a battalion commander. That's the way we were advised. Now those three field grades are all brigade commanders.
Yeah, I went to Don Neal's change of command when he took command over here at TCR. Yeah.
Yep.
I I think people just got to bloom where they're planted, right? And you got to be willing to do what the Army's asking you to do. And I think back to your question about like when do you know when it's time to start figuring out your plans to what's next in life, right? Is the first time that you think you're willing to tell the Army no. You know, if they come to you and they put their hand on their shoulder and they say, "Hey, man, I need you to go do this stuff over here, and it's going to be hard, and you're probably not going to like it, and your family doesn't want to go there." As soon as those thoughts start to start, because I would ask, you know, what would have young Captain Leclerc? Is there anything that the Army would have asked young Captain Leclerc to do that he wouldn't have done? Probably not. The Army asked young Sergeant Burrow to go be a drill sergeant at Fort Jackson, right? There's a lot of guys that wouldn't have wanted to go do that job. I was willing to do whatever the Army asked me to do. And then there came a time in my life where other things started to become more of a priority. And that was the signal to me that it was time to make the transition.
Tell me your thoughts on this, because I've been thinking this for a little while now. We say the Army. We use the word the Army. But the Army's not going to put their hand on my shoulder. A person is.
No.
And so the person is going to, somebody is going to put their hand on my shoulder. And if I'm not willing to tell that person, I'm going to say yes to whatever that person says. I'm starting to feel like if the person that's about to put their hand on my shoulder, I'm willing to tell that person no, then that's the case. It's not the Army, it's the people, right? It's like, am I serving with the people am I continuing to serve with people that there's no way I would tell that person no. Then I'm going to keep going. Then I want to be around those people. But imagine if you're surrounded by, like 4 or 5 people that are going to put their hand on your shoulder and you're like, 1, I don't know who you are. 2, I don't know who you are. And 3, the person that's going to ask me this, I'm willing to tell that person no. Right? What are your thoughts when it's a person versus an enterprise?
It's tough, man. Like, I mean, you got people in front of you and people behind you, right? Like you're charged. Leadership's a privilege. Like leading soldiers is obviously a privilege, right? So, and with any privileges comes some sacrifices. And sometimes you just got to make some sacrifices in order to retain the privilege of leading soldiers, right? It's an honor to be able to. You have to. It's so incredibly like inspiring to be the guy standing in front of whatever formation, doesn't matter the size, if it's a fire team or a brigade or whatever, to be the guy that is standing out there and your responsibility is to be deserving of that, right? Like you have to, if you're standing out there, you have to think about, am I doing everything in my power to be the best that I can be? And if I was one of the guys back in the back of that formation and I was looking out there at me, would I want me out there? Would I want me to be the representative of, all these people? And I think that what you can't do is you can't get so short-sighted,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the instances where it's just a person and you're not just getting a purse gram from, I'm dating myself a little bit, but you're not getting a purse gram from Big Army, right? If it's just a person out there, just, and sometimes it sucks, sometimes like, when I talk about the tenure of my career, it was 30 years. So even now I'm 50, right? Like I was in the Army longer than I was not in the Army.
Yep.
It's essentially, and I'm still working in the Army orbit. It's the backdrop of my entire adult life. Like I went to basic training when I was 17,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Same.
And I think that, yeah, there were some times that weren't great, right? But the overwhelming like pride of standing in front of a formation and being the representatives of all of these people and the joy of carrying the burden of being responsible for them yeah, and having to earn their trust and like the feeling that you get when you realize that you've done that for some folks, right? And somebody, sends you a text message and says, "Hey, man, you gave me a second chance, and now look, I'm pinning E7," and
Yeah.
you get those emails, I'm sure. Um, that stuff's all worth it. So what you can't do is let a short-term sacrifice get in the way of long-term like success and validation. I
Yeah.
think, it's hard though, right? Like sometimes it sucks. You're looking at this guy and he's like, "I need you to go do this." And you're like, "You're kind of a douche, bro." You're probably going to edit that out, but
Nope. It's
like I
staying.
don't want to do this for this guy. He sucks. You know what I mean?
He's
It's not
not in it for
necessarily
the right
about that
reasons,
guy.
or you can't help it,
Yeah.
but you're going to get people that you're going to have people on, whether it be your left and right, below or above, and every once in a while you're going to run into somebody and you're like, they're not doing it for all the right reasons. They're not doing it for the reasons that Charles Burrow. They did not come see me
Yeah.
because they're like Charles Burrow, like they weren't trying to help the organization. This person's trying to,
Yeah.
to move their own career along. And when people run into those, they have a hard time telling those people, yeah, I'll do whatever it is you need. But I love the way you refer to it as as a franchise player, and you're willing to say, I love the Army more than I've ever loved the Army, for all the things that it's done for me and for my family. But I love the people that I've been with in the Army
Yeah.
more than the enterprise itself. It's the people that I would do anything for. Whether it's the Jamie Gerard, he could have asked me to do anything, and I would have done it. And I will do it. He doesn't even have to be in the Army anymore. If he asks me to go do something, I'm going to do it. And
James Shutt,
yeah, if Jim Shutt
right? Like
asked me
that
to
dude.
come back there, I'm in. And I'm
Yeah.
going
If
to
he
do
hits me
some
up
way,
on
shape, or form.
Facebook, that's right. That guy sends me a message on Facebook and says, "Hey, man, I need you to come out to North Carolina to help me do whatever." Like, yeah, dude. Like, I'm on my way.
I'll be there.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
alive. If
That's right.
alive,
That's
you
right. Well, I
calling me.
mean, Jason Aldridge, Bradshaw, Wall, all those dudes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Carrazzo, friggin' Ott, Matthias, like all those
Fep
guys.
was here. Fep's
Everybody.
still here with me
Uh,
right now.
is he?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Tell him I said hi.
I will. I see
Uh,
those guys.
all those guys, man, and guys from way back in my past, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if they're watching your podcast or whatever, but guys like Rob Carter and Kevin Floyd and Steve Robbins and Danny Rose and a million other guys that I'm not naming that it would take an hour for me to go
Yeah.
through the list of all
Yeah.
those people that
It would.
were so valuable to me. You know what I mean? And made me who I was, right? Like I had a bunch of folks come to my retirement ceremony and there, a bunch of nice videos about like, "Hey man, you were so impactful." And people talking about like I was a good NCO and a good dude and all that. But man, I'm just a reflection of all these people, right, that I learned from. And so the only reason I was any good at any of that stuff is because of guys like First Sergeant Hill and, all the rest of my Matt LeClaire, Jimmy Howell, every single dude that I had an opportunity to work for that I learned something from. All that is just a conglomeration of all that good stuff that I managed to steal.
Yeah. Yeah. The last, before I go into like the last couple things, which is usually the last bucket, is so what? We've talked about all this stuff for now for an hour, over an hour, and it's like the so what, it's whether it's something that we haven't talked about yet, or it's a kind of a conglomeration of those things. It's the people like me, leaders that have been doing it for a while, that you want to, that you want to kind of reinvigorate in me, whether it's people that are, kind of in the middle of their career, or people that are, people that are considering the Army, or they're in their first assignment in the Army. So it's kind of like those three buckets, right? But before I go
Mhm.
into that, is there anything that you had hoped that I would have asked you about, talked about, a category that we didn't get into so far in this conversation, that you hoped we would have talked about?
Oh man, I don't know. I don't know. Um, I got to pass, bro.
All right,
I
good.
got. I don't know. I got.
Yeah.
Let me think about that. Let
Okay.
me
Well,
think about that.
think about it for a second. And what
Yeah.
what advice? Start with advice for like people like me. You've known me for a while. You know what I'm all about. And here I am. We've had this conversation, but like, what's your advice for like guys that have been doing it for a while? They're brigade commanders. They're still out there leading. And now I'm sure you see it there with the war fighters, and you're seeing it there in Europe, and you're seeing it. What's your advice for people that still got the uniform on, right about now?
So it's tough right now, right? There's friction. Um, Aside from the political landscape, which we don't need to go into. But the Army's facing a tough challenge right now. We're having recruiting and retention problems. There's some challenges associated with like how the general public sees us. You know what I mean? Like there's some blowback from Iraq and Afghanistan. There's some kind of challenges still left over from the sexual assault, sexual harassment, like stuff that we had going on, that the public has, trust has started to slip. It's still really high, right? But we took some shots to the gut, right? We took some body shots along the way here recently, and I feel like it's important to demonstrate that we are a professional organization, that we are the profession of arms, that we are professional soldiers, and we are the true believers. Like one of the reasons why I stayed in the Army so long is that I consider myself a true believer. I believe in the Constitution. I believe in the defense of the Constitution. I believe in the underpinnings of our society. I believe in the American social contract. And I wanted to have the opportunity to defend all that because I think America is important. And I think that we do more good than we do harm. Um, and I think that we can be a guiding light for the world. Do we got our problems? Yeah, we do, right? Everybody does. But I think that kind of like that same second lieutenant or that same PFC that shows up at an organization, like the desire to do good is there. And I think that if you are a senior leader in the Army, or any leader in the Army for that matter, like you have a responsibility to nurture that. And the more influence you have, the greater your responsibility for that is. And I think that that's a privilege and an honor, and you should be grateful that the Army still wants you around, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's what I think about that. My advice to senior guys is like, keep getting after it. Like, keep doing your thing, right? Like, keep getting out there and taking care of these folks that are coming to you, from all walks of life, from all places, with this desire to be successful, and enable that. Like, take care of that. Like, take that little flame and turn it into a raging bonfire, and make that guy everything, or that gal everything he or she wants to be. You get a chance to do that, man. Who doesn't want to do that?
No doubt it fires me up hearing you tell me, I'm taking it, like you're saying it right to me. And it gives me goosebumps, like thinking about the opportunity to do that on a Saturday. Someone's like, you were going to record on a Saturday. Yes, I do this on a Saturdays. Like this, I love doing this. I love what I do. I love the people that I do it with, even more. Right.
And we got this long line of folks, right? Like, Um, we owe it to our predecessors, right? Guys that slogged through the mud in the Ardennes forest, guys that, braved the monsoons in Vietnam, all the way back to the very beginning when it was a hatchet and a pistol, and they're trying to like figure this out, like that's our legacy. We get to be a part of that. The Army's older than the country, right? Like
Hmm.
we're the first institution. And I think that to have an opportunity to walk in the footsteps of some greatness there is something that we shouldn't take for granted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want you to get the last word here. And I asked about three groups, but you kind of dabbled on all three. I feel like those things have, if you do what you just said as a leader, if you're doing that as a junior officer, as a junior NCO who's kind of in the middle, or you're one of those people that are giving it your first assignment and you're trying to figure things out, you're about to pin those stripes on, or maybe you haven't yet, those people. What you just said, like kind of, it resonates, I think, with all of those audiences. And because I think what you're saying is the true believer, like it's in your heart. It's out there. Those are the things leaders demonstrating what the right way to lead and the right way to take care of people is. What does it truly mean to take care of people? It's that they can go and fight and win in combat. And if you do those things, then their family's gonna trust you because they know that if they have to go to combat, they're going to be prepared. Whether they come home or not,
Yeah.
they're going to be prepared to go and do what it is that they signed up to do. That's what we can do for when we talk about taking care of soldiers. That's what it's about. It's making sure that they can fight and win in combat. But I wanted to leave it to you to kind of wrap this thing up. Any final things that you got from Matt LeClaire? You can speak directly to me. You can speak directly to anybody. But Charles, I'm thankful for this conversation. I'm thankful every single time I get a chance to talk to you. I learned something new. I've got 2 pages full of notes sitting in front of me right now on things that 30 years in the Army that you're reminding me of as a colonel now, as a dad with 4 kids, only 1 left in the house. I'm learning from you every single time we speak, and so I'm super thankful that to share our conversation. This is just the tip of the iceberg on the things that you've taught me along the way. And I'm so thankful that you did this so that I could share it with as many people that are out there listening.
Yeah. So I'm assuming the vast majority of the audience is somewhat military related, right? And so if I'm gonna take a second to like throw something at the greater audience, I would say that there's a lot of guys like me who that are out here that put it in, right, and did our time and got all these great experiences and got all this stuff out of it. And we're out here looking back at you, and man, we're rooting for you, like all of you. You know what I mean? I still care about all those guys that are out there, like lacing their boots up every morning, picking up a gun, and being America's last 100 yards of American foreign policy. If you're gonna go out there and do it, man, just know there's a bunch of dudes like me that are proud of you, and we love you, and we want you to be well. And go out there and be safe. And if you can't be safe, be deadly, right? Like, go do your thing. We love you.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
We're smiling on top of the world. too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky on your mind.